This is a video to introduce the module on short selling. Now, short selling is a way to profit from a decline in a stock's price. So a simple explanation of how it works is that you have an account, let's say that you have an account with $500,000 in it, and you identify a stock that you believe will go down in value. The stock is selling at $50 a share, and you believe it's worth $25 a share. And you believe there's some news that will come out that will make people look at the situation and evaluate the stock and say it's worth $25 a share. So everyone that owns it will sell it until it gets to $25 a share or something of that sort. So what do? You've got $500,000, you've got a $50 stock, so you could sell 10,000 shares, a $500,000 position. So let's walk through the arithmetic of how and the mechanics of how that would actually work. So you have one account, you're only making one bet just to make it simple here. You would go to your broker and say, can I borrow this stock? Let's call it ABC. Can I borrow 10,000 shares of ABC? I want to sell them short. Your broker would go to his book of stocks that he has available to borrow and determine whether or not he can do that. If he has accounts that allow him to borrow their shares, he would loan them to you, essentially renting them. There's a small charge to do this, but I'll explain that in a couple minutes here. But he would loan them to you, and you can then take them to the market and sell them. Now, why would someone loan stock? Well, actually they get paid for it. There's a small compensation. Large institutions have big portfolios, and that's another way that they can add to their returns. So they'll allow you to sell short their shares because of the fees that they bring in. So the process would work like this. You have $500,000 in your account. You would take those 10,000 shares and sell them in the marketplace at $50 a share. So what do you have now in your account? You had $500,000. You sold those shares. You gave someone those shares, and they give you cash for those shares. Now you have $1 million of cash in your account, but you have an obligation to return those shares to whoever you borrowed them from at some point in the future. So what happens? You go along and the news comes out and the shares indeed do drop to $25 a share. You go to the marketplace and buy the shares back. It's 10,000 shares at $25 a share. It's $250,000. $250,000 goes out of your account and the shares come back in. You return the shares to the party that you borrowed them from. So now you have only cash in your account, but how much cash do you have? You started with $500,000. You got $1 million total because you sold the shares at $500,000. The $50 per share times 10,000 shares. And then you bought them back. And you bought them back, 10,000 shares, $25 a share. You paid $250,000. So the net amount that's in your account at the end of all of this is now $750,000. What you started with, $500,000 plus $250,000 in profits. That's how the process of short selling would work. Now, it's not that simple, not that easy, but that's the mechanics of how it would work. Short selling is not the opposite of buying a long stock. The research process is different, the mentality is different. You're looking for bad news on the horizon as opposed to good news. Stocks go down when bad news comes out, especially if it's a very expensive stock. Business has been very good, expectations are very high. You can see a substantial downside movement in the stock when bad news comes out. So why is this really different? Well, let me go through the mechanics of short selling from a slightly different angle. Let's say that you have $1 million in your account, and you sell $1 million value to your account, so you just cash in your account to begin with. You sell short $1 million in shares. So now you have in your account actually $2 million of cash, but you have an obligation to return this $1 million in stocks that you've borrowed. So let's say that the market goes up 20%. And your stocks, just like the market, go up 20%. You didn't have particularly bad picks, you didn't have particularly good picks, they just went up like the market. Now what does the situation look like? Well, you've got stocks that you're short that are now worth $1.2 million. They went up just like the market. And what's your account value? You start out as $1 million, but then you lost 20% because when the stock goes up, you lose money. So now your account value is, if you liquidated everything right now, is actually $800,000. You've lost $200,000. You've lost 20%. And you can think about that in terms of what would you have to buy back if you bought back those shares. You would spend $1.2 million. Your account has $2 million in cash, $1 million that you started with, plus $1 million that you received from selling those shares. But it'd take $1.2 million now to buy them back, and that would leave you $800,000. And so that's the liquidation value of your account. Now, your broker's concerned when he looks at your exposure, $1.2 million, and compares it to your account liquidation value of $800,000. It's 1.5 to 1. And not that long ago, you were 1 to 1. So this creates a dangerous situation. Brokers don't like that. They'll be talking to you about your account, and if it goes much farther, you'll actually get a margin call, and they'll force you to close positions. So there's a complication that makes a short-only portfolio kind of dangerous. Now, what are the incentives? What's going on in the company when times become difficult? Now, if a company reports bad news, stock goes down quite a bit, a lot of the CEOs, roughly half in that sort of situation, get fired. And this is a CEO. CEO jobs aren't that easy to find, especially if you just came off a job where it would appear that you failed. So CEOs really don't want to have bad news come out and impact their stock. Also, they may own a lot of stock. It's not uncommon to have large insider ownership, and also stock options create incentives. So high stock price is better than low stock price. And management has a lot of control over how things are reported. Management determines the accounting methodologies that are used. So they can play games to some extent and influence what earnings are actually reported. Now, if bad news is imminent, a CEO says, business is turning down. I've got a problem. My job's at risk. My net worth is at risk. This is a real problem. I want to sell my shares, but I can't. If I sell my shares today and report bad news tomorrow, I've got a legal problem. It looks like I'm trading right in front of an announcement of bad news. If I know bad news is imminent and I sell my shares, this is bad. But there are accounting games that can be played that will defer that bad news for, say, a quarter. I sell my stock now. The bad news comes out 3 or 4 months from now, and well, it's awfully tough to say that I sold right in front of bad news, knowing the bad news was coming out. It's a very hard legal case to make. So you'll see that happening. It's not all pretty, but this is not an uncommon situation. So we'll go through a number of methods that can be used for deferring bad news or accounting manipulation. I hope you find that to be an interesting discussion online.